I hear the Lord say, ask to pray for him. And he said, Taj, whatever the market value of the house is, my wife and I, it couldn't be a better time. We'll do a private deal, not even put the house on the market, and sell to you and your family. And I will never forget that day because what is up, everybody? It's your boy Taj. And today I'm going to be sharing how I went from a D1 student athlete to a landlord, all while I was still in school. Crazy, I know. So, long story short, this is the gist. My parents and my sister purchased the off-campus house that I was living in, and I became the landlord. So we were looking for a student housing opportunity to invest in. We grew up having tenants in our primary residence. We renovated our top floor in our home. My parents did when I was growing up. And so all we've ever known was having tenants. But when they purchased their home and where they moved, there was no tenant. And they weren't going to renovate to get one. So they was like, well, why don't we basically just do what we've been doing with the tenant, but with a whole separate house. So that was the plan. That was the idea. So we started looking for properties where I went to school because I'm like, yo, it's 5 people living in this house, all paying rent per room. We could just get a student housing property. So, and the students, so as long as the school is open, which, you know, these private institutions, they're not going anywhere. Let's just get some student housing. So we looked into it. We found a property that we really liked. And then somebody else like scooped up the property. But here's where the testimony comes in. My landlord at the time, little backstory, great friends to this day, but at the moment I had only met him one time, which was at move-in. So this is my junior year, and I am texting him because something was wrong with the heat in the house, and he apparently, I found out, was in the hospital because he accidentally sent me his location on his phone. And I'm like, are you okay? Like, why are you in the hospital? Like, is everything all right? And I never forget, I fell asleep doing homework the night before in my room because I never do homework in my room because I know I'm going to fall asleep. And that's exactly what happened. And this next morning was when we were texting. So I was up finishing homework earlier than I usually was. So he said, give me a call if you can, and I'll like tell you everything. And I'm like, okay, like I'm up earlier than I'm supposed to be, or normally would have been. Let me just talk to this guy. So he tells me about how he had through countless surgeries. And here's this guy, this millionaire guy that I've only ever heard stories about from older upperclassmen that lived in the house prior to myself. And it was like, oh yeah, like people tried to buy the house from him before, like alumni, and he's like not budging and all this different stuff. These are things that I've always heard, right? But this is why I didn't think that what happened next would actually be a reality. So I'm like, he's telling me this whole story on the phone. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is crazy. Like you really never know what people are going through. So I ask him, like I hear the Lord say, ask to pray for him. And it was so clear, and like my heart dropped to this bottom of my stomach, and I was like, yeah, there's no way I'm praying for this guy. But I had just went to a crew talk the night before that I was talking about obedience, and I was like, let me just ask to pray for this guy. And he was like, yeah, like honestly, I would love that. So I'm like, oh wow, okay. Like, so I prayed this quivery prayer in my mind at least. And at that moment, my life changed because from that one interaction, and then I followed up by going to see him in person because I genuinely cared, and visited him at the hospital and was like, yeah, like, you know, I just figured I'd bring you your rent in person because I know you weren't home. I've dropped his mail to his house sometimes, so rent to his house. So he was like, oh man, like you don't have to do that, X, Y, and Z, but it's nice to like have somebody like to talk to and everything like that. And he was like, yeah, like, so who's living in the house next year? Who's living in the house next year? Because we would just find more and more people to rent in place of us. So he was asking me that, and I was like, I don't even know what I'm doing, because my parents are currently like, we're looking for a rental property as a house, like as a family to invest in. And he's like, oh, like you can buy the house from us. And I was like, like that's funny. Like again, thinking of everything that everybody's told you, pushpin. That is the reason why you don't ever go off of what people say, and you go off of relationships. You go off of your true gut feelings, because when you're genuinely seeking the well-being of other people, things happen that literally you couldn't have written. Like I couldn't have made this story up. But anyway, resume. So I leave, everything was great. I seriously didn't think anything of his offer. And then a couple days later, he asked me again, so who's living in the house next year? Who's living in the house next year? And I'm like, honestly, the deal fell through with the house that we were looking to buy. We're back at square one. We don't really know what we're gonna do, let alone me for living, like renting from you next year. And he said, Taj, whatever the market value of the house is, my wife and I, it couldn't be a better time. We'll do a private deal, not even put the house on the market, and sell to you and your family. And I will never forget that day, because again, my life changed. Our family was able to make that a reality. We followed up, we closed, we went through the home buying process as we've been through a couple of times on personal property, but and investments. But this one was super special because for me, I got to see the fruit of a obedient the voice of God just telling me to be obedient in a moment. He knew the whole time. God knew the whole time what he had planned for us. And this story is just the beginning. Like, it's so, like, never underestimate the power of obedience to God when he speaks to you, because there's a reason that he's either testing or giving you a command. So long story short, let's fast forward. I become landlord. It was super weird. My boys that I'm rooming with, now I have to collect rent from. That was a whole thing. Not a bad thing, but just internally, like, wow, like this is my reality right now. Then I graduate, and God lined up a job for me before I even... No, he lined up the housing for me because I already was living there, and I plan to continue to live there and save so I can just set myself up better down the line by living in the property that my parents own and just managing it for them. And then the opportunity came for a job like not far away. So I lived there, I worked. 10 months later, within those 10 months and beyond, I saved what I would have been paying if I moved to the city and just like was spending however many $100 a month in rent. I was just pocketing it because I basically had little to no living expenses. So because of that, and we never stopped looking at the market, within 10 months after graduating, I'll never forget, 20 days before my 23rd birthday, my mom and I now, my sister and her did the first one, me and my mom did the second one, and we found a gym that needed so much work. And that was the property I think a lot of you probably saw on my Instagram and stuff. But like, that was a whole nother journey. I will make another video for that testimony. But I just wanted to share my truth and share God's testimony on what he has been doing and what he is continuing to do in our lives. This was back in 2018. So yeah, I graduated May of 18. So it doesn't really matter. Anyway, I thank y'all so much for tuning in to this tea time video. I'm so excited to just tell y'all my testimony. Feel free to leave a comment, ask me any questions, encouragement, whatever. So I love y'all. Hope y'all have a blessed day. Peace.